So it's a new start for Warhammer 40K, vastly changed rules in Warzone Nephilim, and a whole bunch of balance changes. So let's talk about 5 of the strongest armies in the game right now. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're going to do a video that I've been looking forward to for a little while now. Now the dust has settled and people have actually started to get tournament games in with all the new rules that came out, we get to see which armies are taking the top spots of 40k in a much more balanced looking new meta. Warzone Nephilim has changed the standard missions and the secondaries for most of the factions. A whole bunch of armies got points that went up or down, and there were a whole bunch of balanced data slate changes as well, nerfing certain armies and buffing some of the weaker ones. With that in mind, I thought we'd take a look at some of the winners and runners-up of the biggest tournaments that happened over the past weekend to see how people are putting all these new rules into practice. Broadly speaking though, things are looking a lot more balanced than they were before. There's a lot more factions entering the top spots than there were previously when it was things like Tyranids, Tau, Harlequins and Craftworlds, and very little else. First up, it does seem that Necrons have gone from one of the weakest armies to very much one of the strongest. I did suspect that they'd be getting decently more powerful when I did that predicting tier list, but it does appear that they might be arguably one of the stronger factions of the game now. A lot of really solid new combos with the new core rules added in, decent points cuts, and some very powerful new secondaries that are kind of hard to stop. The first list that we have today is a Necrons list run by Nathaniel Bjorg to take first at the Show Me Showdown. A very big 40k tournament indeed with over 100 players, so no mean feat. The list is one of the custom dynasties, relentlessly expansionist and eternal conquerors, the one that gives you a pre-game move and objective secured on everything, and I saw people refer to it as the Auspex dynasty, which I do think feels very appropriate. The list is made up of a supreme command for the Silent King and 2 patrol detachments, 2 patrols being used to field a unit less of troops and also get 2 Catan on the table. I'll be talking about the Silent King in a video coming up on the channel soon, but he went from being a very good Necron unit to a truly outstanding one, near auto-include in a lot of lists I think. He's only 400 points now, so it's decently cheap, gained the core keywords so he can use his own powerful rerolls on himself, getting massive damage boosts, and able to use a fair few other powerful options. I believe he can be Veil of Darkness across the board. I think it's very tempting to have him at the heart of just about every Necron list at the moment. He's got powerful shooting, very solid melee with fights last, gives you more CP which is excellent, and hands out some massive buffs to nearby units. For his supporting cast of characters, all of whom also got cheaper, there's a Chronomancer with the Aeon Stave for a 5+ invul and reroll charges for a unit. Might potentially be good for the Locust Destroyers or maybe even the Scarabs I guess, to make them extra hard to remove. There's a Catacomb Command Barge with a Gauss Cannon, Staff of Light, and the Orb of Eternity to resurrect some Necrons on 4+, likely going to be targeting either the Tomb Blades or the Locusts. And then a Technomancer with a Canoptic Cloak and the Veil of Darkness. The cloak will make him fairly manoeuvrable and can heal other friendly Necrons. And again he can be putting powerful models back on the table, like those Locust Destroyers or the Tomb Blades. The Veil can be good for a redeploy as well, and potentially could be good for using to get either the Tomb Blades or the Locusts out of combat if needed. Moving on to the squads, holding down the troop section are 2 units of Immortals with the Gauss Blasters. Arguably troops are a bit less relevant when everything has OBSEC. They're still going to be solid for setting on objectives and doing actions and things though, while chipping away with a bit of fire. There's 2 units of 3 Scarab Swarms, which will very much like the pre-game move, a cheap little way to hold down midfield objectives early on. A great big unit of 9 Tomb Blades with the Gauss Blasters and Shadow Looms. They put out really quite a lot of fire for fairly cheap. This configuration is 28 points, puts out 4 Gauss shots at AP-2 at close range, is really fast, and has a 5+ invul save from those Shadow Looms. They seem like the ideal target to buff with either the Silent King or the Catacomb Command Barge. Finally, there's a big unit of 6 Locust Destroyers, all with Gauss Cannons. Really quite cool to see these being run competitively rather than the heavy destroyers, which have usually been outcompeting them up to now, and I still think do give them a very decent run for their money. I guess the Gauss Cannons give you better volume fire, plus are perhaps a bit more generalist, not just being locked to hurting vehicles. And again, they seem like one of the units of the list where most of the buffs are going to be centered, resurrecting them from the dead and giving them +1 to hit and things. Finally, there's not 1 but 2 different Catan. Very annoying to have to deal with 2 of these guys, as you can only deal 3 damage to them in each phase, plus they heal. The ones selected were a Transcendent Catan and the Catan Shard of the Deceiver. The Transcendent has Cosmic Tyrant. That allows it to use 2 Catan powers rather than 1. He has Times Arrow and Transdimensional Thunderbolt. Times Arrow gives you a decent chance to snipe some heavy infantry. The Thunderbolt's mainly mortal wounds. And then interestingly there's the Deceiver, who takes Cosmic Insanity and Sky of Falling Stars to hit medium infantry units. Kind of interesting to see the Deceiver here. He'll allow you to redeploy several units at the start of the game, so it means they're going to get some very good positioning advantages between that and pre-game moves. But the vast majority of the time people seem to weigh that up poorly against the raw damage output of a Void Dragon or a Nightbringer. It is really cool to see him getting played competitively. You can use that to put units in strategic reserve as well if it makes more sense, I guess if you're worried about losing something very important turn 1. Overall, there's really quite a lot of big scary threats to deal with. The Silent King is a massive menace, so are both the Catan, and the Tomb Blades and Locust Destroyers can all take some very nasty buffs and regenerate significant amount of destroyed models in a single turn. Combine this all with some relatively easy to achieve Necron secondaries and they're in for a really good time. Next up, and winning the other really big tournament of the week, was an Imperial Knights force run by Mike Hazelwood, who used it to take first at the Paris Grand Tournament. Again, another enormous 40k event, over 150 players at this one. I think I managed to get all the details of the list right. I must admit it was an interesting challenge trying to translate all of this from French. In any case, I must admit the list is quite a cool one. It's run using the Freeblade Lance Army of Renown detachment, the one that gives you part of the tradition of Questor Imperialis and Mechanicus. The entire army is made of Freeblades, and you get access to a few really useful stratagems. Broadly, the list is built around one paladin buffing armigers to ridiculous levels, and being able to do it to quite a lot of them with the Helm Dominatus. For the oaths that the Imperial Knight army takes, they've got Defend the Realm for the almost auto-include gain a command point each turn, and also Refuse No Challenge for a combat buff, +1 to hit in melee, and between the two of them it's not usually going to be all that hard to acquire honour points, hopefully getting Virtuous at least reasonably easily. I guess let's start with the Knight Paladin, seeing as he's the big one buffing all the others. Knight Paladins have a great bondsman ability that they can give to 2 of the different armigers. It allows them to reroll 1s to hit and to wound, so it's a nice damage buff. And this one's got the Herald Exalted Court ability, giving 2 of the armigers a 4+ invul save that functions both at range and in melee for some reason. Those 2 with -1 damage is just a crazy level of buffs, and the Helm Dominatus allows you to basically farm out the buff to multiple armigers as the game goes on. You get to nominate 1 armiger each command phase that will retain the bondsman ability, even if you use the 2 buffs for other armigers next turn. It's a bit weird as the army arguably gets stronger as the game goes on. Towards the end of the game, I guess most of the armigers are likely to have the bondsman ability in effect. In general, this guy's going to want to keep as safe as possible, maybe farming out a bit of shooting if safe. He's got a Storm Sphere pod for a fair few crack missile shots, plus the rapid fire battle cannon. He takes Iron Bulwark for a 4+ invul save against shooting. And for his Freeblade trait, he has Paragons of Honor to get an extra oath, protect those in need for a 6-inch heroic intervention, and if he gets Virtuous, he gets to use an extra bondsman ability each turn, potentially farming out those awesome buffs onto even more armigers. From there, he's basically got 10 armigers to apply those buffs to, 7 Warglaves and 3 Helverins. A couple of the Helverins might not necessarily need the bondsman ability, as one of them has the Bastard's Helm. That's the one that gives him and a friend +1 to wound against their targets, excellent with those general purpose autocannons. The Helverin's unit also takes the Haunts of Beast Freeblade ability, giving them +1 to hit versus monsters and vehicles, +1 to damage versus Titanics, and an extra honour point if you happen to kill any monsters or vehicles, which is really handy towards getting you to Virtuous. A pretty efficient fire support, and will be good for holding down home field objectives, and maybe even doing an action or 2 as they go. Then there's all the armigers, a set of 3 that take the Strike and Shield martial tradition. Hit rolls of 1 to 3 always fail against them in melee, and they get to ignore AP -1 in melee. One of them also has Cunning Commander, a warlord trait that allows you to farm command points on a 5+ each turn. Then there's some really heavy hitters, 3 Armiger Warglaves with Melter Guns, and they take that scary new Noble Combatants trait, the one where if they attack with their non-sweep profile, they get to make an extra amount of attacks, as per any that didn't actually inflict damage. Very solid combat for the points. Finally, there's the last Lonely Armiger Warglaive with a Melter Gun. He's Mechanicus, and he takes the Honoured Sacristan's ability, +1 to saves versus damage 1 attacks. Being Mechanicus could also give him a bit of access to a few other useful stratagem options. The Freeblade Lance can be particularly good for that. Strength from Exile if any armigers are out on their own can give them a massive damage boost if they need it. Overall, a really cool list. Having quite so many Obsec armigers is going to make it a nightmare to hold objectives against these guys, and will give them lots of extra expendable bodies for doing their own nightly secondaries. There's tons of damage output coming out of these guys, with all their bondsman abilities and buffs, plus their individual free blade benefits. Moving on, we come to the Sisters of Battle, and the Sororitas took first at the Bournemouth Brawl, a Bloody Rose list run by Manny Chima, who I wouldn't be too surprised if he'd cover it himself over on Glasshammer Gaming at some point. Sisters were another army that was looking very strong out of the updates. A few nice points drops, particularly to Zephyrim. They were already enjoying Armour of Contempt and extra miracle dice, and again, like the Necrons, they got some very powerful secondaries that again they can score fairly easily. I must admit, whilst faction-specific secondaries are fun and everything, I'm not sure it's the best idea to have them being one of the determining things of game balance. In any case, all that aside, this is a brutal melee sisters list, a single Bloody Rose battalion, loading up on massive amounts of some of the strongest melee around, 3 units of Repentia and 3 units of Zephyrim, backed up by a fairly typical cast of strong sisters characters and a bit of Melter Fire support. Leading the host is not only Morven Val but Saint Celestine as well, Morven Val's remaining a very solid centerpiece model, a bit of fire support, pretty excellent melee with a fights twice ability, and okay defense for a character, plus her rerolls just make one squad absolutely go crazy each turn. She's particularly awesome at buffing Zephyrim, I think, with their very high number of quite low strength attacks. Celestine's a fast moving nuisance that can bully lighter infantry units. She takes a fair bit of killing, particularly with Armour of Contempt, and then lightly gets straight up again to have another go and kill another important unit. Perhaps better than ever as well now the Gemini aren't giving up loads of extra points for Assassinate if she does get killed. There's then a Canoness with the Blade of St. Eleanor and Blazing Ire. The blade's a Blessed Blade with Strength +2 and Damage 3, and Blazing Ire is the Bloody Rose trait for +1 attacks and able to advance and charge. She also takes the Words of the Emperor as well, an expensive but fairly common pickup on fighting melee Canonesses. It makes one enemy unit fight last, which is great in itself, but also gives you the option to turn off enemy invul saves for a turn, which is a really big deal. Finally, there's a Repentia Superior to goad those big Repentia units towards their foes. She can give them a damage buff, but also perhaps more importantly advance and charge, giving them a truly massive threat range, particularly with locking in numbers with miracle dice. Then we're into the units. For holding down objectives, there's 2 units of Battle Sisters and 1 big unit of 10 Sisters Novitiates. The standard Sisters will be great for doing actions and objectives, and the Novitiates cost a little bit more, but actually have a half decent melee threat on them. In theory, 40 strength 4 attacks coming out of them with Bloody Rose hitting on force, which for a 75 point unit really is quite good. We've then got 5 Celestian Sacrosants, which can be useful for protecting characters still, even if not quite as much as before, and still pack a very meaty countercharge punch in their own right, and 3 Crusaders, another cheap little unit that'd be quite good for actions, screening, or holding down objectives. Then there's 6 enormous melee punches in 3 units of 7 Repentia, and then 3 units of Zephyrim, 2 units of 8 and 1 of 7, and all of them utterly lethally scary in Bloody Rose. With Miracle Dice they've got enormous threat ranges, and combine great with the Bloody Rose combat buff stratagem, and extra attacks and AP. Repentia were already great, in theory you can bring them in from strategic reserve and lock in charges with Miracle Dice if you like, and the same could be done for Zephyrim deep striking if you wanted to, though I think it's often going to be better just to start on the board. Finally, we've got 2 units of 5 Retributors, each of them going all in on the Multi-Melters, 4 Multi-Melters and an Armorium Cherub. I think potentially they could be starting in that Sororitas Rhino, which Bloody Rose have a stratagem to be able to pre-game move and get it in a really threatening place. I suppose depending on the opponent you could theoretically mix it up a bit. You could have Repentia or Sacrosanct starting in it if you wanted, depending on whether or not the Retributors are going to be threatening enough starting on the board. Overall, perhaps not really too surprised to see Mass Zephyrim being played. They were one of the more surprising points changes of chapter approved in my opinion. Already fairly solid as they went, and then getting a big 2-point cut meant that they're almost auto-include, particularly for Bloody Rose. I kind of wouldn't have been too surprised to see Seraphim there, but seeing as there's only 3 fast attack slots, it seems that the Zephyrim have won out in this list. Next up, the Craftworlds are still out in force. Taking second at that big Show Me Showdown event was a list by Ben Shervin, and a lot of the recent Craftworld lists have either been Ulthwé or Hail of Doom. Hail of Doom was nerfed a bit, so it's maybe not too surprising to see Ulthwé winning out. The list is perhaps a reasonably balanced one, a fair bunch of Aspect Warriors, and some Psychers, Rangers, and supporting vehicles. The Ulthwey Craftworld gives you a single reroll on each unit when it attacks, plus some mortal wound protection and an invul for the units that didn't already have one. All of that combined with a +1 to cast for the first spell for each Psychic Seer really is quite a good package of buffs that helps out the majority of the army. Leading the list we've got a couple of Psychers, Eldrad Ulthran with Fortune Guide and the Will of Azian. I'm going to guess that Fortune's going to be going on that block of Wraith Blades. Really quite nice to have a tough unit like that having some Feel No Pain. Will of Azian is a handy objective power if you need it. It gives a unit objective secured and the ability to do actions and shoot at the same time, both of which could potentially be handy. Baharoth still makes a return. He went up 20 points to 160, but still being able to bound on and off the board at will, dealing damage and being hard to pin down, and then also jump in with objective secured when it's needed, all seems to be strong enough even at the new points cost. The other Farseer is a Skyrunner with a Singing Spear. They take Doom for some reroll wound rolls, Executioner for some extra mortal wounds, and Fateful Divergence, always handy to have around if you've got a spare cast, farming you a command point each turn. He also takes the Ulthway Relic, the Ghost Helm of Alashazia, knows an extra power, and casts of a 9+ can't be denied. Finally, in the Elite section, there's a Warlock Skyrunner with Quicken and Restrain. They take the Weeping Stones, a bit of manipulation for the Strands of Fate. Moving on to the infantry units, there's 3 squads of 5 Rangers, 2 of the squads taking a Wireweave Net. The upgrade that costs 10 points now that deals mortal wounds to charging units. I must admit, I would have guessed that those ones would have died off a bit, seeing as they went up in points now, but Ben still seems to have thought it worth it here. They can provide a little bit of sniper damage while doing things like actions and objectives, and Strands of Fate can allow you to punch through a helpful wound if you need to finish off something big. Then it's quite fun to see a whole bunch of 5-man Aspect Warriors, 5 Howling Banshees including an Exarch with Mirror Swords and Piercing Strikes for extra damage, 5 Striking Scorpions including a Biting Blade with Crushing Blows. Crushing Blows is the upgrade that allows you to automatically wound targets, 5 Swooping Hawks with their Las Blasters. They went up in points a fair bit, but should still be able to stay safe while blasting the enemy with a whole bunch of wounds each turn. 5 Warp Spiders, including an Exarch with Power Blades and Web of Deceit. Web of Deceit is another redeploy ability. Once per game after shooting, they can disappear off the board and set up anywhere 9 inches away. And then finally that block of 5 Wraith Blades with Axe and Shield. Something pretty durable to be putting on objectives. They've got good toughness, solid invuls, will likely be getting Fortune from Eldrad, who can also give them Obsec. They do seem like a pretty decent thing to park on an objective and dare the enemy to come and take it off them, as a lot of things will struggle to put them down. Finally, there's a bit of vehicle support, 2 units of 3 D-cannon support weapons that are quite nice in Ulthway, as they have the stratagem for +1 to hit. Despite the barrage nerf, I think that the D-cannons are one of the artillery pieces that still work okay. Then there's 1 Viper jet bike, a really fast unit to put onto objectives and can be used for engage on all fronts and things. And a Wave Serpent with twin Bright Lancers. Based on the units, I would guess that that'll be carting around the Howling Banshees and Striking Scorpions, delivering some fast-moving melee threats into combat, while hopefully not getting them all shot up. Overall, maybe not the hugest changes from previous Craftworld lists. I did feel like a lot of things that got nerfed still kind of remained usable. I guess perhaps things like Dire Avengers and Fire Prisms might not see quite as much play after the changes. In any case, the Eldar still seem to be very solid, putting in a few decent performances over the tournaments. Finally, we've got a Space Marine list, and placing second at that Bournemouth Brawl tournament was an Iron Hands list, this one run by Nassim Fauchain. Perhaps a fairly typical competitive Iron Hands list, a successor chapter for extra melee damage, a big Dreadnought castle with their character Contemptor Dreadnought, a drop pod punch with some multi-melters and grav cannons, and some pretty dangerous Vanguard veterans. The list is led by a tag team of a Primaris Lieutenant and a Tech Marine. The Lieutenant has the Bolt Rifle, Rites of War for Obsec, and the Vox Spiritum for a bigger aura, and the Tech Marine will provide his +1 to hit, healing, and target protocols, the one that allows one unit to get a bunch of rerolls. They look like they're both aimed at supporting the Dreadnought Castle, 3 Redemptor Dreadnoughts with Macroplasma, Icarus Pod, and Onslaught Gatling Cannon. Still looking very solid, particularly so since Armour of Contempt, and maybe even a bit more so seeing as a lot of the top army lists got heavily nerfed after the Balanced Data Slates update. Joining them, there's also the Relic Contemptor Dreadnought, 2 Twin Volkites, and a Cyclone Missile Launcher, and it's been upgraded with that character stratagem so he can't be directly targeted due to Lookout Sir, and he takes that nice merciless logic warlord trait, the one that gives him exploding 6s to hit, so a very nice damage buff to his volume fire. Iron Hands have that one command point stratagem to put a unit in the Devastator doctrine as well, and that can be pretty powerful if you need some extra AP on those Volkites. Otherwise, there's a whole bunch of infantry for skirmishing with enemies and taking objectives. For the troops, there's 2 units of assault intercessors and 1 unit of cursors, reasonable enough defense in light cover with armor of contempt, and enough melee threat to bully most other enemy light infantry units that get near, particularly with Whirlwind of Rage giving them extra exploding 6s to hit. Interestingly, talking of chaps tactics, the second one isn't Born Heroes like quite a lot of other Iron Hands lists use. They went for Master Artisans instead, netting them a few re-rolls on the Dreadnought Fire Support as well, plus the Multi-Melter Land Speeders and Devastators. Then there's 2 units of Vanguard Veterans, and they've had a bit of a shift that I thought that they might. Now, rather than Storm Shields, they're taking Lightning Claw and Chainsword, saving a fair few points and actually adding to their melee damage with another Chainsword attack on top of the Lightning Claw ones. At least per the points, they tend to be roughly about the same sort of durability as Storm Shields, even at AP -3. The Storm Shields will be a bit more survivability, but of course they cost more. As well as the Lightning Claws, the Veteran Sergeant also has a Power Fist, just for a little bit of anti-tank. Next there's a drop pod full of Devastators, 2 Grav Cannons and 2 Multi-Melters in each unit, plus a Cherub in each. That means that you can use the Cherub to help out either the Grav or the Melters, depending on what your target is, and they can drop in turn 1 in Iron Hand's Devastator Doctrine, get reroll 1s to hit, and also not take the penalty for moving and shooting with heavy weapons. Quite a tempting pickup for Iron Hands. It basically allows them to delete one big threat straight out of the gate. There's not that much that these guys won't wreck with some decent rolls. Finally, there's a couple of land speeders with multi-melters. They'll quite enjoy those Master Artisan rerolls, and they're very fast little vehicles which could make them good use for engagement on all fronts, or just zipping out to far-flung objectives and trying to hunker down on them and survive. Quite cool to see a little bit more Space Marine success. Arguably, with a lot of the top armies being nerfed, they might be able to shine through a little bit more. Maybe the most interesting changes for this list were the Vanguard Veterans having no Storm Shields. Seems like a pretty decent alternative with Armor of Contempt in the picture. So overall, it's been pretty fun to have a look at some of the successful lists coming out of this new Nephilim update. Glad to see that at least some of the theories are holding up, and the top spots do tend to be a lot more diverse, and some different list ideas shining through. It does seem like Sisters and Necrons might be some of the top threats though in the game of 40k going forward. In any case, let me know your thoughts on these down in the comments below. Feel free to point out any other interesting bits about the list that I might have missed. Obviously I'm not the person who played these, so I'm sure I'm interested in some really cool things about how they were used practically. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, while I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new Warhammer things just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and you can find that down in the video description below if you're interested. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, including seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that seems good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.